what's up, guys? Professor Red Pill here on the Straight Talk podcast, coming to you live from Tbilisi, Georgia. I have Adam Maxwell here with me. He's my second chair from Liberty Rising, and we're going to be talking about Trump, tariffs, crypto, and the global economy, and how this is going to affect the overall economy in the long run, future predictions, and how to plan for it. So take it away, Adam.
Thanks for having me here. Looking forward to getting into tariffs and their effect on the global economy. It's something that I've seen a lot of good memes about, but also a lot of misinformation, including from eminent economists like Jeffrey Sachs, whom I find to be pushing agendas on this topic and not educating, providing a real picture of what these mean and what these mean tangibly and their effects both in the immediate, medium, and long term.
Yeah, I mean it's a shit show for sure. Yeah, we're looking at I mean, if you've been following the channel, the podcast for a year now that we've been on here, and you've stayed with the Consolidator Legacy Group, and the Straight Talk podcast, the official news channel, you would be well aware that this was coming. I predicted that there would be some economic turmoil in the first quarter of 2025 after Trump was inaugurated, shortly thereafter after he was inaugurated. And we're starting to see that begin now. I mean, you as an economist, I mean, what's your deep dive into it? What's your analysis of what's going on with the trade tariffs? I believe it's going to culminate to trade wars, and then we know like what trade wars eventually lead to, as we saw in World War II. Eventually, they become actual shooting wars. But what's your input on it?
I think that one of the greatest revelations to come out of the war in Ukraine and against Russia is that the systematic hollowing out and deindustrialization of the United States of America has left them in a very weak position. You combine this with the Great Replacement. It's a conspiracy, not a theory, a conspiracy reality, where the powers that be are attempting to exploit the aggressive force of the government to attack ordinary people, to destroy their ways of life. We used to be a real country, and now everything's being financialized, being faked, being sent overseas, kind of fake and gay. And then what they want to do is then import people to replace ordinary workers and further degrade the real economic or real living standards of ordinary people. And we're going to focus on Americans, I think, for this, and we can go into extended analysis afterwards. But the president of the United States of America is embarking on the imposition of tariffs, and I am a proponent of free trade, of laissez-faire. I don't appreciate taxes, and tariffs are taxes, but I'm not an ideologue. I have my principles, but I also respect the economics. And I think fundamentally the reason for these tariffs is quite simple. Incentives are everything. And the incentives so far, especially the past 30 years, but the deindustrialization of America has been going longer than that, decades and decades. It's it's having real impacts and a real degradation on the quality of life in America, on the quality of goods, and what it's doing is squeezing ordinary people over the long run. And gradually, it's very insidious. You're being stolen from by theft. You're being robbed by printing money, and they're shipping away the jobs and meaningful employment, trying to shift you into fake and gay services. And then when you have supply chain crises like the peak of globalization 2020, or even just One of the biggest problems you hear with most Americans is like, I hate my job, it's unfulfilling, it's not paying me enough, it's crap, all these problems that come from this service market. And otherwise also. But one of the most immediate things we're seeing with the imposition of tariffs is that companies that have moved their industries, their factories offshore or abroad, are now saying, well, we're going to bring those back to America. That's bringing in jobs, that's bringing in factories, that's producing value in the country. And what you want is to keep the capital there, because in the long run, you've only got, according to some models, there's two things impacting economic growth: capital and technology. And capital includes the labor force, but the labor force in terms of its number and in terms of its quality, and the factories and the land, plant, etc., and technology. So this kind of addresses these long-running systemic problems that the United States has self-inflicted as a result of the government, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, taxes theft, or taxes are theft, if you will. But most importantly, what I'm seeing is not so much the offshoring. That was during the Clinton administration in America. And who was the prime minister during the 90s in England? What was
Tony
her name?
Blair,
Was it Tony Blair in the 90s? Or was it
Thatcher,
the other? I think it was Thatcher, right? She was offshoring as well. But nonetheless, like I said, it was offshoring in the 90s into the early 2000s. And then the mass immigration. So the mass immigration has been basically increasing ever
John Major.
tenfold. Yeah, since 2010. Right around the 2008 crisis, towards the end of that, you started seeing migrants leaving the United States, leaving, I guess maybe leaving England for that matter too. But like now, it's in the last 5 years, I would say 5 to 10 years, since 2014. You've seen a mass migration of people into Europe, mass migration of people in the United States and the UK, especially. I mean, they don't call it London stand for a reason. I mean, it is what it is. There's probably more non-English immigrants in London than there are actual Londoners or English for that matter.
Yes.
And it's the same in New York City, Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, Chicago, and like a lot of these major metros in America. And not only that, but they've moved out to the rural areas as well. And that's also a leading cause, because they're taking jobs. And the big proponent was as well, if you're offshoring, okay, well, you're saying our jobs overseas, okay, we'll restructure, we'll go back to school, we'll change our job field. And a lot of people did. But that was the first stage of the first stage was the increasing taxes under Bush administration. Bush senior started a massive increase in taxation, the NAFTA under Clinton, and then the offshoring under Clinton, and then followed by Bush Jr., who basically was the beginning of the mass migration and the war on terror, which basically started destroying a lot of these Middle Eastern countries and nation building through U.S. aid. And these people started getting visas and resident permits in America. And then there was the mass migration thereafter under both Trump, Obama, and Biden. And basically now, what you got paid for $1.25 in 1990, you're getting paid $1. And because obviously the wages haven't really gone up. But with the massive inflation, you literally are getting less for more. And on top of that, the taxation has gone up in certain areas. They're taxing everything. And now with the tariffs, you're going to have hyperinflation, which you already had hyperinflation of 200% GDP, give or take, with the shrinkflation that we talked about many times in the podcast and the channel. So you have all these culminations, and this is creating a vibrant republic. And now people are fed up. And I think now you're starting to see nationalist movements, and this is what usually happens. And then you either have a civil war, a revolution, or you have a global war, or all three. What do you think?
It sounds not incorrect. I'll just make a few Europe-centric points. So John Major Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of Britain from, I think, 1979 to 1990. Then it was John
That's what I'm saying.
Major,
Right, yeah,
1990 to 97, and then Tony Blair. Tony Blair especially made a lot of these progressive reforms, which fundamentally transformed Britain in a terrible way. The
he was Labour
Conservative
Party, right? Was he Labour
Yes.
Party? Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Progressive faggots. Okay.
But like in the United States of America, in Britain there's also the Uniparty. Doesn't really matter. But the Labour government were in power from 1997 to 2010, and then the Conservatives have had a nearly iron grip on the country ever since. And since Tony Blair, since 2000 before, there's been this policy of mass migration in the UK, so almost 30 years now. And it started in the UK, or it probably started elsewhere, but certainly in the UK. It then escalated more. Angela Merkel in 2015 said we're going to invite 1 million refugees into Germany, and then began leveraging, not just Angela Merkel, the EU oligarchy began leveraging their central planning to coerce European countries to take in these migrants, and it's this multicultural experiment being forced on people without any consent of people. And I don't really care much for the United Kingdom anymore, not at all. But it's important to talk about it because it is like the totalitarian nation of the West. So in the UK, then Germany, the rest of Europe, then it goes to Canada and the United States of America. So Canada's recently had this influx of immigrants, largely Indian, but I'm sure lots of otherwise as well as, of course, under Joe Biden especially, there's been we're going to cancel, or they didn't let Trump build the wall in his first term. Biden stopped that, invited all the migrants. They've had millions pouring through. And so this is all part of an elite conspiracy to harm ordinary people. And this is why they've been shipping jobs offshore and importing people in. Cheaper labor for them, cheaper costs, cheaper. Them as the shareholder class benefit, especially, and this is especially enforced and elevated more with the power of the state, and the ordinary people are suffering as a result. The GDP number may go up, but the real living standards per person go down, and it's not just an economic problem. Like London-stan, English people are a minority in that city. It is not an English city, and that these are different people, and they come with different problems. And so we're seeing that in Canada, you're seeing that across Europe, and you've seen it across America too.
Yeah, like I said, it first begins in the capitals, then it starts to reach to the smaller cities, or like the medium or large scale cities, but like other cities within the country. Then it starts to engulf into the rural areas, and then basically pilgrims and I guess refugees, invaders, whatever you want to call them, they basically encompass the entire country, and then they just change the dynamic, the culture, the structure, the work ethic, everything, the language. And I'm starting to see it here in Republic of Georgia and Tbilisi in the capital. There's massive migration here. There's a lot of people from India, from East Asia, from Africa, and they're working, and Arabia as well. They're working here. They're taking menial jobs like food delivery, taxi drivers, things of that nature, the gig economy. And or they're working as nail stylists or massage therapists or like restaurant, and the restaurants, as well as ownership of restaurants. Entrepreneurship's not that big a deal, but I've seen like Indians and different people working in the back of kitchens and stuff, like Mexicans in America during the during Bush era. And that's where it starts. And then more come in, and then they start taking over neighborhoods, they start taking over districts, and then they take over your capital, your cities. and then they move to smaller cities, and then they just take over the country, and then now you've lost it. And I talked about this in the Telegram group kind of jokingly. I was like, dude, if enough Americans move to Georgia, they could pretty much change the country and influence it to be basically an American colony. There's only 3.7 million people that live here in the country. I think maybe 1 million, 1.2 million, maybe 1.5 million in the capital. But I mean, just imagine if like 3 million people, 3 million Americans moved into Georgia tomorrow. They would change the entire dynamic of the country. They would no longer, like, literally, they would require English to be spoken as the primary language. And they already do speak English because they're trying to join the EU. And there's all signs are in English. Even documents like contracts are written in English as well as in the local Georgian dialect. But it's quickly changing. And that's the thing about massive migration that's coming in here, is that they speak English and Georgians can't compete with them because they don't speak English. And some of these people have more skills and are willing to work, especially the gig economy. I'm not saying that, Georgians are lazy or that Georgians don't want to work, but these people are willing to work for less wages than Georgians, and the salaries for Georgians is quite low. I think we've talked about it before on previous podcasts. But yeah, that's where it starts. And then eventually, like, you lost your country. And that's what we've seen in the Western economies. What do you think? Go ahead. Sorry, you're going to respond. I was going to ask you a question, but yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that this process that you're talking about of demographic replacement is not necessary. It's not really organic usually. So the rural areas in England are called the Shire, or the Shires, like from Lord of the Rings, right?
Right.
It's been a government policy to try and move these immigrants into the Shires, kind of like they were doing in Springfield, Ohio, with the Haitians in America.
Yeah, they've already moved in. Like, when I left America, like 2-3 months ago, and literally my town in Florida was like 80%. It was predominantly like African Americans were the largest minority because they're originally from the area. And so it's the southern states, so like there's a lot of African Americans in the South. But anyway, so like they were the largest minority. Now there's Mexicans everywhere, and they're the largest minority, but they're not only a minority now. Now they're becoming a majority. So it's Spanish speaking everywhere, and the town was like 80%, 85% like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and now the town is like maybe 60%. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, maybe 70. It's completely changed the dynamic of the city, of the town that I was in South Florida. And I broke this down with Terrence Popp. If you guys want to check that podcast out, Terrence Popp's talking about the State of the Union. And I talked about it there, like in states like California, like Texas, like New York, New Mexico. The DEI population is outpaced the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant population. And basically what this does is like what you see in Detroit, in America, Detroit, Michigan, and Flint, when the white Anglo-Saxons leave the cities, leave these metro areas. They're not leaving because like there's better opportunities somewhere else. They're leaving because there's no jobs and the economy has failed. And that's what happened in Detroit, Flint, Camden, Philadelphia, a lot of these major cities that, have like just basically become destroyed. And we've seen the videos that we posted with the fentanyl in Philadelphia. It's well known all over the internet at this point. The zombies walking around. Yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens when you do not control and mitigate migration, immigrants, and you bring in basically low-skilled immigrants that really have nothing really to contribute other than just cheap labor. Yeah.
Well, Chicago used to be called the Paris of the Americas, and now I guess it is the Paris of the Americas because obviously they, as Chicago's been declined. Oh no, sorry, it's Detroit I'm talking about.
Detroit, Paris. Oh yeah, sister city. Yeah, Paris. Okay.
And Detroit used to be like the creme de la creme city of America, where all the manufacturing was, and then there was all this demographic replacement. And I'm not an expert on Detroit, but I know this contributed quite a lot to its decline. And likewise, Paris. I wouldn't want to go to Paris now in the 21st, after 2010.
Even Trump said that. Yeah, Trump said, I'm never going to Paris.
It's a shithole. I just saw a video before this started of some German tourists going to a Paris hotel that was quite cheap, like 50 euros a night or something, and the streets are just littered with garbage. And there's people, people that aren't French hooked on drugs and littering and loitering, and it's a shithole.
That's London, Stan. That's New York City. Well, not necessarily New York City because it's very expensive to live there, but San Francisco, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. Yeah, it's like that. It looks just like that. So, yeah.
So, I mean, Elon Musk has said this infamous quote before, which is that demographics is destiny. So this is a deliberate plan to change the demographics of the country in order to change the destiny of the country. And I think a lot of it just comes down to simple liberal democracy, right? So first off, you have this
crony capitalism, liberal democracy, and boomers that are greedy and narcissistic and only care about profits and their money, and they don't care about community. They have no family values. That's what I think. But,
yeah. All of these are kind of all along the same thread. That they don't, if everyone's the same, or if nothing's objectively true, and we're all just people, man, what difference if you import foreign people without consent of people, and then change these things up? And again, the crony corporatists, they benefit from the cheaper labor. They benefit from more masses. There's more consumption. It's cheaper labor. It's more power. The politicians, they benefit. They get a greater voting base. They increase, for example, social welfare, which is a wealth redistribution from the productive, especially incumbents in society, onto those whom they have invited in. And what we see in the Soviet Union of European states is that when, for example, Hungary and Poland say, we don't want to accept these immigrants into our country, they face sanctions from the Soviet Brussels. And you must do as we say. And they've said no, and they've faced sanctions as a result of refusing to fundamentally alter their demographics based on not the will of the people, but the will of the oligarch ruling class.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's a shit show. It's a clown world, and now we've realized that the economy is fake and gay. I mean, we've been talking about this for years now, and now we see it, and now the normie conformies are starting to realize, shit, it's a fake and gay economy. There's a Reddit post that I posted in our main, not our main channel, but one of the channels that we follow, and about Reddit posts where people are like, yeah, I can't find a job since 2020, since COVID lockdowns, and they're just like, yeah, I'm tired of applying because I just get these joke letters, and I'm or they just game me for basically we've talked about this before, and I talked about this on a jobs podcast. I actually got 7,000 views on this channel on Rumble on the podcast with Mario Liquid Monkey, and I did break it down, and I did talk about this, and that that basically the job market's fake and gay, just like the economy. But more or less, the situation is how is this going to change? Do you think under Trump's tariffs? Do you think this is going to change anything? Do you think it's going to affect anything? What do you think? Future predictions,
well,
I guess.
You've got. It's not just tariffs, right? Tariffs are an instrument, a tool of power. It's not just an economic maneuver, it's a strategic necessity in a world where this free trade orthodoxy and this neoliberalism ideology has eroded the industrial capacity, weakened national unity and resilience, and empowered geopolitical rivals and foreigners, right? So Trump has come on an American first policy, which is America just ideas and anyone can become an American, or is America Americans, especially Americans who are there and who have been there for generations? Is this America? So I think it's not just the tariffs. I think Trump has demonstrated at least some commitment to tackling the rampant corruption of government spending. Now, I'm not hopeful that he's going to do as much as I want or as much as he ought to. And I'm not hopeful that things will be better in 4 years than they are today. But it's a good start, and I commend that at least. And then I'm hearing that he's considering ending the H-1B visa program. They're deporting illegal immigrants. So it's an entire policy with many different instruments that are being utilized.
Yeah.
So
I honestly, you remember, like, I was talking about this with Lupiter and, a lot of people we brought on here, and even we talked about this, and I was like, yeah, I don't think anything's going to change with Trump presidency, but it seems like he's actually doing what he said he was going to do. Well, that's crazy for a politician, but it seems like it. Yeah, he's making a start.
He's like, he could fire 80% of government employees tomorrow. He's not doing that, right? He's not going as hard as, say, Javier Milei, but he's at least trying, it seems. So just to get back to your question, what does this mean for the United States of America? It's not merely tweaking its trade policies, it's recalibrating its economic and national security strategy to meet the demands of kind of this multipolar world where industrial self-sufficiency, technological leadership, and economic sovereignty determine long-term success.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Tariffs were very heavily used during the Reagan administration. And I did talk about this previously on the podcast, as well as in the Telegram group, links in the description. But yeah, more or less, the Reagan did this. And what it did was it because Japan was on the rise as far as a global competitor and the automobile industry and electronics. So when when Reagan implemented these trade tariffs on Japan and other countries, it forced them to put basically plants inside the United States, and that created jobs. That's where you have a lot of these old Rust Belt cities. There's a movie on it with Michael Keaton called Gung Ho, and that it was talking about this, where they were like, well, we're not seeing the productivity in the US, and we're going to just move the plant back to Japan because it's just not profitable. But that's just a movie. It's not like it happened, because all the Japanese manufacturing that came to the United States, it's still there today. Most of it's still there, like Nissan and Honda, but they were offshoring to Mexico. And that was one of the tariffs that I was reading about, that apparently Mexico, Lupiter talked about this too, and how fake and gay and retarded it was. So apparently they bring the car into America, they put the engine in, or they do some kind of work, then they ship the car back to Mexico to do other work, and then they ship it back over to America to continue fixing, adding to the vehicle and manufacturing it. And then I think they ship it back to Mexico and then back to America to sell. And I don't know how sustainable that is, but that sounds fucking retarded. Just thinking about it, it sounds fucking retarded. And Lupiter was he's the one that always talked about this and how hilarious it was, because they do this on a global scale too, where they're shipping this fucking vehicle on a ship for months. I mean, think about the cost to ship this around the world to build this vehicle. And it's like, why don't you just build it in one fucking place? Doesn't that make sense? You would get more product out. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. What are your thoughts? Do you know anything about the manufacturing industry?
I don't, but I've seen similar things where they'll harvest a fruit in maybe Africa and ship it to South America, and then it'll be processed, sent back to Africa, and then get to the United States, and weird things like this. And the question is why? So I'm you have to go into these specific industries. I'm sure there are reasons. You would like to believe that at least the corporations are acting in their best interest, their profit incentives. But certainly, a problem with the United States of America is that people are. They have their higher wage earners, so they demand a higher salary. Now, sometimes this is backed up with greater productivity and skill set and whatnot, but I could pay an American $60,000, or I can pay 60 Vietnamese. instead, or 30 of them. And so your productivity, however great you may be, you're not worth, a dozen of your people in a more impoverished or developing nation. So the many of the industrial jobs in the USA have been offshored and replaced with low-skill service jobs, finance and administration, and it's created an economy detached from real production. And the problem with this is that it's not something you can just restart. It's not something overnight. The expertise, the supply chains, and the workforce degrade and become lost. So you have to build that up gradually. So again, going back to this Jeffrey Sachs, one of the most powerful, leading, influential economists, he says, look, all the markets are reacting negatively because to impose tariffs is to reduce the benefits of free trade, but it's just a heavily neoliberal worldview that the only thing that's important is the GDP number. And again, what they do is, to get the GDP number up, they send the goods offshore, and then they bring new people in so that there's cheaper labor in the USA, and the Americans, for example, are the ones getting squeezed. Now, there are some benefits, of course, to free trade, which is that, for example, mass production does result in mass production. So you might get more goods at a cheaper price, although maybe at a lower quality. And there will be inefficiencies and all these problems. And again, this geopolitical problem of, if all the factories are abroad, especially if supply chains shut down, or looking at the medium to long term, where you want to have that innovation and capital in-house, it sets you up to be incredibly vulnerable and lagging behind the competitors like Russia, China, Vietnam, Poland. Poland, when I was growing up, was the poor country of Europe. In the UK, all the Polish would come over and do these cheap construction jobs. Everything was being built by Poles. I think within the next decade, Poland GDP per capita is going to be higher than the UK. Kind of one of the big flaws in the proponents of free trade is that they utilize a 150-year-old model, which is called Ricardo's theory of free trade, of comparative advantage, to argue that any restriction on free trade is a net loss. However, this model assumed capital immobility, which means industries would shift within a country rather than being permanently offshored. Today, capital is highly mobile. Corporations relocate factories and supply chains overseas, and this permanently strips industrial capacity from domestic economies, breaking this fundamental assumption behind free trade's supposed universal benefits. And again, it leads to these long-term economic weaknesses.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fake and gay. I mean, the thing is, I worked in corporate training overseas in a lot of developing economies in Asia, Middle East, and Caucasus and Europe. And one of the individual companies that I didn't work for, but I knew people that had worked there, was Bosch, German-based German tool company. And I worked with people that worked for Motorola as well. And this was in East Asia. And they were telling me that basically they said circuit boards are coming from I guess Japan or something like that, and then in Korea they make certain things to this phone, then they ship it to China to completely put it together, and then they ship it to America, and they're doing it all here regionally within these three different countries. And it was the same thing with Bosch. They were building, I guess, the certain tools. They were building some parts of the mechanism, and then they were shipping it to China to assemble, and then to America. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's just cheaper to hire these people. And like I said, it all depends on the skill level, because obviously, like, Koreans, Japanese are much more educated and more skilled than China was at the time, because I was there 16, 17 years ago, give or take, when I first started working in this industry. And now I don't know, it's maybe a lot different, but at the time, this was like when they were started offshore to China and these different areas in the early 2000s, like mid 2000s, early 2000s. And yeah, I mean, that's just how it works. And then like when I came back to the States recently, like I said, I worked in I did summer as a mechanic working for a dealership, and this is actually a Japanese owned dealership, and like the stickers on the car were made in Mexico or assembled in Mexico, parts from here, and they put all where the parts are from and stuff. And I was like, fuck, I thought these were made in America, but no, I guess they're manufactured in Mexico, and they're bringing them in. And then they had vehicles that were made in Japan. And let me tell you, when I've done enough mechanical work during that summer to realize cars that were made made in Mexico and cars that were made in Japan. And the cars that were made in Mexico, I would see leaks. And the cars that were made in Japan, I never saw a leak in one of those vehicles. So when I was looking to buy a new car after COVID, after the lockdowns, I bought a Japanese car, of course. The main thing is I've made sure, I was like, is this made in Japan or is it made in Mexico or America or wherever? And sure enough, made in Japan, and I bought it. And I got a good, 60,000 out of it, give or take, close to that, at least 40, 50,000 miles. I sold it. I retained value. I made some profit, or I made my money back that I put into it in equity. And it was a good, reliable vehicle. I just don't need it in America anymore. I sold it because I didn't want to ship it overseas. It would cost too much, and I'd rather just take the equity that I had in it, because otherwise it was a good vehicle. I would have kept it and drove it to 100,000 plus. There was a couple of mechanical stuff here and there, but it wasn't anything major. It was a good, reliable vehicle. So that being said, like certain things that are made overseas in certain countries where they have the industrial capabilities and then they have the work ethic and the cultural understanding, like Japan or maybe Korea to an extent, but I don't really care for Korean products. I've worked there. I've seen the quality of the people and the work that they do. But yeah, Japan has got that entrepreneurial mindset. They were I guess they were imperialist before World War II, but they work hard, man. They're very intelligent people and they're very industrious, and they have that work ethic. But I'm in a country, in a region now in the Caucasus, and I've seen development over the 14 years plus that I've been here in the region. And the language ability, especially, and the culture has changed quite a bit. They've become very Americanized, like you would see in Japan or Korea after the Korean War and after World War II. So I think in like 10, 20 years, if they continue to progress, they can easily be a Korea or Japan, definitely Republic of Georgia. But unfortunately, what I've seen is that they've been tariffed by the United States and EU by the Biden regime. And because of their stance on Russia, that they want to remain neutral. They don't want to get involved in that conflict. They want to open up a second front. I guess this news just recently came out that USAID and the American government was trying to push them into a second front, and then the government just staunchly said no. And the reason why we said no, this war's probably over, and we stayed out of it. And this is the reason why. So yeah, I mean, I think Georgia's got a lot of potential, and I think it's definitely going to be a good country, economically speaking, because it is an anarcho-capitalist system, or at least as ideal that you can get to that. It's one of the first experimental anarcho-capitalist systems. Low taxes, limited government, limited bureaucracy, ease to do business, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, they passed the the foreign agent bill, and there was some reason for that. Because of the amount of American NGOs here, USAID especially, or USAID backed, or they were just like, yeah, we don't really want these people dictating and plotting against our infrastructure, our government. But at the end of the day, it affected their economy ultimately, and especially with the tariffs and or not tariffs, but sanctions rather, not necessarily tariffs, but sanctions that were imposed because of it. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting situation we're in interesting times, like Mr. Robot antidote. And that's what I'm saying. We're in unpredictable unpredictable, interesting times. And I said that this was going to culminate in 2025. Most likely in the first quarter, we're going to see major changes in the West, and as well as with BRICS and everything else that's going on. So, yeah, I think we're on a fun ride. I don't know. We had talked about off camera, like what about Ukraine and that conflict, and then potential for economic situation, decline, collapse, whatever, recession. And I was on the proponent that basically we're in recession in Georgia, we're in recession in Europe, we're in Russia is seeing their wartime economy. They're starting to see some economic situation, and obviously East Asia is in depression. It's very, very much so. This is stuff that I've been getting from news wires and what I've been posting in the Telegram groups. So what are your stance? What you had talked about it? What was it exactly that you were predicting or thinking?
Well, I said that so Trump's imposed tariffs and stock markets around the world have reacted by going down, and I said it's not exactly how it is. Like the markets were overheating. People had all-time highs were in profit. People need to take the profit, and how markets work is they need some kind of trigger in order to make these big moves, big reactions. So the imposition of tariffs, it does matter, but it's a trigger that allows the market to correct, and which is people taking profit, selling, and then they'll buy back in. And we're talking about collapse, and although the market had a minor correction this past week, it's still going up. And I've said for 4 years that I don't believe the crash will occur until after the resolution, likely collapse and surrender of the United States position in Ukraine, which I think could occur over this summer. I think by the end of the summer, the conflict will probably be over. It could not be. It could continue September, October. It could even continue for another 20 years. But I personally think it will be resolved this year. And I don't think that the global markets are going to collapse and have a 10%, 20% contraction until that trigger signals to the cathedral, to the institutional investors, to those who, that's how the world works. Okay, we've lost in Ukraine. Now we can start selling. I think that's going to be the signal.
Okay. Yeah, I was like the sell-off of the cryptocurrency market recently that happened, that just occurred. That was pretty much, I said it was probably going to come. You obviously explained why it occurred. Basically, it was just a reason for the major investors.
Well, you've got technical factors and fundamental factors, and the technical factors come from the fundamental factors, and they all coalesce. It's just, this is the march of the market, and they're both important.
Right. I mean, what about housing bubble? Like, if there's no salaries, no jobs, that's what I was predicting, is a housing bubble in 2025, maybe first quarter, second quarter. We generally when we see market corrections, we see it in the fall, and that's why your predictions, I know it's going to happen in 2025. We both know this is going to happen in 2025. I was saying you're going to see some type of interruptions shortly after inauguration, and 2025. I guess we saw that with the crypto market slide, and more or less, like I said, I was pretty accurate to the window. That's over. Now we have to look to Ukraine. I've also heard from insiders in Republic of Georgia. They were saying that, because we're probably going to see a housing bubble. We've probably already seen it. I've shown you guys in the Telegram group the amount of empty flats and all the construction going on, the fake and gayness of the capital here, and the fact that there's just no investors, there's no tours. I've had various amount of like podcasts where I've gone on the street and I've shown the graffiti and the disrepair. and the garbage that's starting to collect, and the massive amount of migrants that are here, and the fact that like it's just there's just even what's his name, Henderson, Chris Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. He made a video talking about that Americans. This was around the time that the Foreign Agent Bill, because I was in America at the time when this was passed. He was like, he mentioned the same thing, graffiti, all this different stuff, and that Americans basically are starting to leave. And then there were comments throughout his section of his YouTube video talking about, I was American living in Tbilisi, we're gone. And then other people in the chat were like, no, we just moved to another city because it's not as bad as Tbilisi, this sort of thing. And that's what I'm noticing. That's what I'm seeing. There's no Americans here. I can't find any. There used to be a lot of Americans here, a lot of expats, a lot of NGOs, a lot of different people doing business, or, not mostly non-government people. And because of the Foreign Agent Bill, they've gone. So I don't see them here anymore. And now they've been replaced basically with third world labor and investment. And these people don't really have money. So that money is gone. So all of this construction that you see behind me, this is all the new buildings. I'm in the newer district in the city, and there's like 14, 15 buildings that you can probably see out my window right now. They're actively being built, and there's going to be no buyers for that. So we're definitely going to see a housing bubble in the capital in Georgia. I definitely see that happening. My inside people have said it's probably going to be by summer, and they said that's probably when Ukraine, basically the war's over in Ukraine in summer. Same window that you had said. And that's when Georgia may see a major recession, is what he's saying.
So we talk a lot about this, about the collapse that we're in. And I like to say that
it's a slow burn. It's a slow burn.
It's not a distinctive event. That there will be a big trigger, but I prefer to say it's a boiling pot. We're getting to the 80-degree mark, where you're starting to see the bubbles of gas start popping up, and you may will the housing market blow up? Maybe. The housing market is a big bubble, right?
Quadrillion, like when you include China and Dubai, the United States, UK, Canada, and a lot of
markets are connected, which means that the central banks who are manipulating these markets, they don't want the Georgian housing market to blow up, because then if the Georgian housing market blows up, probably the Azerbaijani, the Turkish,
Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, possibly, might affect everything.
They would all start to melt down, and then you have liquidity crises, and people, they've lost lots of wealth, so they need to start selling assets, and that's where they start liquidating their stocks, and the price goes down, and selling their crypto, and gold probably goes up, although some people may have to sell their gold, but that typically goes up in these crises. And I suspect that there's two effects on the price of Bitcoin. On the one hand, if you've lost your house, for example, you may need to sell your Bitcoin in order to survive. On the other hand, if stocks are down, your house is down, everything else is down, where do you want to store your money? Maybe Bitcoin's the place to go. So I don't know which effect is going to be dominating. I suspect in the long run, or in the medium run, Bitcoin will go up. I think Bitcoin should reach at least $116,000, $120,000 in the medium run, and eventually it's going all the way to 1 million, whatever. That's the long run. Who cares? And I don't suspect it's going to go below 70 or even 100, even 90 in the short term. But when we're talking about a genuine collapse or a burst of this financial bubble, this financial bubble has been going on since 2008, and then 2015 it was a bit shaky. 2020 it should have collapsed, and they printed 80% of dollars in circulation, and that all went into most of that went into the financial system, which inflated asset prices, prevented it from all collapsing. But it's all an illusion, right? This goes back to what we were saying about the economic production, it's detaching from real production, and that's and it's all being financialized, and it's an illusion. So when if the Chinese market blows up, the American market blows up, the European market blows up, and the entire illusion would collapse. And that's very possible. And it ties back to that there's been this shift from production to consumption. The economy no longer builds, it consumes, it services. Instead of developing high-skilled industries, mass migration is creating a low-wage labor pool that incentivizes low-tech and low-productivity service work. And we've been told for a decade that we've got productivity crisis, a deep productivity crisis in the West, in the UK, and the USA. And it's not because people are any more stupid today than they were 30 years ago, but it's because of the shift in industry that we've become a financialized economy detached from real production, and that's been accompanied by this rise of speculative finance and an obsession with stock market growth, as well as real estate prices. And this has diverted the capital, the real value, away from industry, infrastructure, and human capital development. So again, this is not a lack of work ethic or intelligence. It is the inevitable result of an economic model, this neoliberalism, that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term stability. And my number go up, the GDP.
Yeah.
And how do nations break away from this cycle? The USA is in decline, and it's being in decline. And as Josh said, we can talk about how when the British Empire was in decline. Well, first off, when the British Empire was at its peak, it was free trade. Yeah, maybe 10% tariffs, but it's not 80, 150, 200%. About 10%. Towards the end of the empire, from the 30s, that's when the tariffs were imposed. Same thing in the USA. It's possible that the imposition of tariffs may be signaling, that the decline of the USA. But the way out to break free from this cycle, you need to restrict mass migration to allow wages to rise naturally and prevent the continued dilation of native labor power, and then rebuild industrial capacity through tariffs, economic incentives, and investment in domestic production. That's why the Russian economy grew in 2023, because all the sanctions made all the capital from abroad. They had to invest it in the country. And so there were all these jobs, all this investment going around, and they benefited the past couple of years. And their economy is not in recession. It's still growing. It's just, instead of it growing at the 4% rate of last year, it's going to be about 1.5% this year. And so we need to definancialize the economy away from speculative finance and services into real economic development. And that's prioritizing long-term productivity and recognizing that real wealth comes from production, not artificial consumer expansion. For example, if you buy one pair of shoes and that pair of shoes lasts you for 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, that shows up once on the GDP and never again. But if you're buying a pair of shoes every 6 months, then that's a lot of consumption that shows up. The GDP numbers are going up. Wow, aren't we doing better? It's like, no, you're having to go through several pairs of shoes a year, as opposed to having just one pair of great shoes that's been produced, and then you're spending your money on things that matter. And this is the fallacy of this neoliberalist agenda, and it's because it benefits the corporate ruling classes, or the
Right.
ruling classes and their corporations.
I mean, yeah, pretty much. It's that's what I mean about the shrinkflation. It's not so much that prices are going up due to inflation. It's also shrinkflation with the inflation. So yeah, you're getting less for more, or more for less, or less for more rather.
It's called
And
stagflation, where
stagflation is a yeah.
production goes down, real production goes down as inflation goes up.
Right. So you have the stagflation, we have the shrinkflation, and we have the regular inflation. But I mean, like, it's all pretty much the same. Like the two
Well,
is
inflation
combination.
is printing money, and that
Right.
causes prices to go up, or heavily
Right.
influences it. And
So
then
we started with the inflation, and then we started seeing, like I said, the shrinkflation to combat the inflation, the printing of money. And then now we have the stagflation. That Joe Lintley talked about this. He's been talking about it for a year or two now, that we were going to enter stagflation, in which we are in stagflation, as you
and
had pointed out.
stagflation was a big thing in the 90s. Sorry, in the
Right.
1970s,
70s, yeah.
when OPEC said we're not giving you oil. So big tariffs on oil, a big shock to the economy, and as a result, real economic growth declined all over as prices went up, and it was a very tough time, as I understand it.
And we're in that tough time, but it's predominantly in Europe because of the Russian oil. And this is not so much Russia saying, no, we don't want to sell the oil, we want to sell the gas.
It's
It's
self-imposed.
self-imposed. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
self-inflicted stagflation.
the
And
European sanctions sanctioned Europe.
yeah,
It's hurt Russia to some extent, but they've just said, okay, well, we're going to pivot east. And again, there's a hit to this because you're not able to immediately service the large market to the west. You've got to build the pipelines, build the infrastructure, but it creates more resilience and it creates jobs programs, and overall, it's beneficial in the long run to get away from this fake economy that's acting in a malevolent manner.
correct. Yeah, I mean, it's I just don't see I don't see any end in sight. I like I said, the inflation's done. Like, it's you can't go back. You can't put the toothpaste back in the jar, basically the tube, and we're stuck with this inflation. So now it's like, well, Trump's with the trade tariffs. He's trying to get people to, I don't know, what exactly is that? Like, you know a little bit better than I do as an economist.
So what's the question exactly?
The question is like, with Trump's trade tariffs, that's, you said it was a national security apparatus. Like, it's mostly, is that to basically increase productivity in the United States, and force corporations to basically retool and rehire Americans to put Americans back to work? Or what exactly is that?
Yes, yeah, it's a transformation of the American economy. The transformation of the past few decades has not been a natural evolution, but a deliberate, policy-driven shift that has eroded the foundation of real economic prosperity. It's not just in deindustrialization or offshoring alone that's led to this declining living standards. It's it's a two-pronged assault on the working and middle classes. You have the destruction of American industry, these neoliberal free trade policies allowing corporations to maximize profits by outsourcing production, eliminating high-paying jobs, and replacing them with low-wage, low-security service work, and the mass importation of cheap labor. So simultaneously, these Western governments have pursued mass migration policies, flooding domestic labor markets with cheap workers to suppress wages, increase corporate profits, and bolster voter bases. The result is a squeeze on the average American, whose wages stagnate, job security erodes, and economic prospects diminish, all while the GDP numbers continue to climb, masking the decline in individual prosperity.
Yeah, it's definitely a clown world, clown show. Where do you, I mean, like, we've already kind of talked about this and all. The other question was in the XRP that we had talked about previously. What exactly is the hoorah about XRP, and its significance with the trade tariffs and the current global economic situation?
Well, I'm not as
Not as an expert, but just like a kind of a synopsis.
In
like
general, right, XRP, it's a system token. The CIA token, Fed coins is how it's used to be said. It's favored by this class of people that rule the world and manipulate things to be in their interest, and that's what a lot of them are holding. BRICS, they're not looking to develop a currency right now, but at the BRICS summit in Kazan last year, there were policy papers, the BRICS pay, BRICS currency, BRICS dollar, whatever, and they were all suggesting we're going to build this on top of XRP as that internal ledger. So, and that's just one example. So if all the central banks and all the the system infrastructure is going to be built on the XRP technology, and you need the XRP coins in order to have that functional, and then the XRP coins, which are limited in nature, become more valuable. And so when you're looking at the technical charting of XRP, say to Bitcoin, it looks bullish or favorable that over the medium run, XRP will increase increase in value at a disproportionately higher rate than Bitcoin does. So by the time Bitcoin goes from $100,000 to $200,000, XRP, which is now $3 almost or around that, would not be at $6, double. It might be all the way to $20.
Mm. Wow, interesting. Yeah. So I mean, that being said, I mean we've pretty much covered everything. Like I said. Yeah, thanks guys for joining me on the podcast. If you're on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitch or locals, and like I said, join the locals, join Liberty Rising's locals, join my locals. I invest a lot in this equipment, and we put a lot of effort into preparing these podcasts and giving you guys updated information from a academic standpoint as well as kind of a laissez-faire type of standpoint. As a it is what it is. $3 Rumble 3 gets you $3 off your first month's membership on my local channel, and I do post stuff on there. I am writing a book on unleashing your Sigma male, an authentic leader's perspective on the Sigma male trend or the situation, like what people are talking about now. And I do a deep dive and I break it down. Each chapter is going to be, each rough draft, I guess, of my chapter until I publish it, is going to be free for paid members. I'm going to post it every time I finish a chapter, and you'll get to read it first before it goes to publication. That being said, yeah, anything else you want to conclude, Adam, before we close out?
Just to say that, I've been quite harsh on, or quite harsh on this free trade policy, because it's an illusion. Like everything, it's all a psyop. It's not really free trade. It's all games of power. If it was free trade and that's just how it is, I would be all in favor. And I am more in favor of free trade than tariffs. But I'm also again not an ideologue here. I understand realpolitik, and it's all about power at the end of the day. So there are benefits to mass production. There are benefits to, like we talked about, importing this cheap or low wage labor. And on one hand, it's great that it's great for the consumer that the kitchens are staffed by people who are taking less wages, because maybe your goods might be of a lower cost, maybe they're of a lower quality. It does impact jobs. It does have long-term impacts on society, and there's more than just economic considerations here. But there are some benefits. Not everyone can afford a $50 pen, but everyone can afford a 50-cent pen, right? It's not going to be as good, but it's better that this technology, these goods and services, are able to proliferate even at a lower standard. So, I talk a lot in my group about the economics of all sorts of things, very educational, and so there are pros and there are cons. I focused a lot on the pros of tariffs this discussion, but it's not it's not black and white, it's very gray.
Mhm.
And that's, I'm going to say, our outlook for the rest of this year. Very gray.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see some corrections coming. So like I said, the crypto correction is just the first of many to come. Yeah, that's just what I've been predicting for since 2014 is a major correction in 2025, which we were already starting to see a little bit, and we saw previously with the digital age bust that we talked about in a previous podcast that was going to happen soon. It did. We called it. So yeah, more information. Stay tuned. Please subscribe to the Rumble channel, the YouTube channel, and join locals to keep up to date with what's going on. And so you're notified right away when we go live, when there's new content being posted. That being said, thanks guys for joining us. Excuse me. Thanks guys for joining us. And thanks Adam from Liberty Rising.
Thank you.
Do Sigma males make good leaders? That's the other question. Yeah, I would say so. I would say that Sigma males make excellent leaders. And the reason why they make excellent leaders is because they're authentic, they're transparent, excellent communication skills, and they often possess self-confidence and leadership qualities.